to me as I was working on this. Obviously the recommendation section is going to be joint effort between Barrett Planning Group and the committee, but just to get us started talking. And like Alexis said, I will be regularly pausing for, feedback and questions, etc. Every section or so. And so please do not hesitate to speak up, give us some feedback. We are still working on this draft and appreciate anything you might have to add. So next slide, please.
Yep.
This is a Bridgewater land use map prepared by our wonderful GIS person, Sarah. And so these are going to be some of the main categories that I'm going to be going through. For the land use patterns and for the zoning, I'm going to touch on the three major categories of residential, commercial, and industrial, with a few extra categories as needed. As you can see on this map, these giant navy blue splotches are the institutional land category. And that covers a wide variety of things. It has its own section, but just pointing that out now, the yellow is low density single family residential. That is the majority of land in Bridgewater. And we have a smattering of commercial and industrial. Commercials in the red, you can sort of see it outlines some of the major transportation corridors. So we will go through and talk about briefly some of the historical trends for each of these major types of land use.
And just so everyone is aware, the parcel level information we have here is from Bridgewater Assessor's information. So if there's anything you see that is questionable, or you have that you disagree with or anything like that, certainly please let us know. But just so you are aware, that is where we got the categories from.
Yes, thanks, Alexis. That is important to note. This is a tabular breakdown of these different use categories. We sort of collapsed them into general categories, the actual land use codes. There's a bunch of them. But so as you can see, residential 1 or 2 family sort of near the bottom is 43% of the total land in Bridgewater. The institutional lands are 21%. 18% of the town's land is currently vacant and undeveloped. And then all of the other categories are much smaller, down in the single digits. Next slide. So this is a graph you might have seen before. I believe it was originally included in the housing presentation. I include it here to highlight what I've circled in red here, the period of really explosive growth that Bridgewater experienced starting in the 1970s, really all the way up through 2000, where it slowed down a bit. And this is not only important for the housing section, but here in the land use section, such an influx of people into the town is going to make a big difference about how land is used. There was an explosion of residential development, but as you'll see, that also correlates with increased development of all kinds in the town. So next slide. So this is the history of residential development in Bridgewater. Originally, some 370 or so years, I believe, back when the town was officially incorporated. Most of the settlement was around the traditional town center. Most of the town was historically agricultural, sparsely populated. That pattern continued really all the way up until the 20th century. Even when industry came to town, it was still sort of focused in that one area. But it really started to change post-World War II with deindustrialization and with the introduction of zoning to most of the United States. That's when most towns first adopted their zoning bylaws or ordinances. And I just pulled this little quote from the 2002 master plan because I think it summarizes it pretty succinctly, but essentially the shift away from the center sort of began in that latter part of the 20th century. And so when that growth boom came in the 1970s, a lot of it was sort of subdivisions, less density out into what had been Bridgewater's countryside, out away from the center. And out of Bridgewater's 8,500 or so housing units, the majority of those were built in 1970 or later. So really a lot of the residential story of the town is more recent. There's a lot of historical buildings too, obviously, but the majority of this housing has taken place following that subdivision pattern. Now, recently we've seen more of a shift back. I think this is a sort of a nationwide shift in philosophy of zoning that we see in a lot of places, but back towards denser, more centrally located residences.
I'm
Bridgewater's
sorry.
recently, oh, that's okay.
Do you want me to go forward? I apologize. I was looking at the participant list. Am I on the right slide?
This is good. Thanks, Alexis.
Okay.
And basically the point is that now, recently, more apartment complexes and denser mixed use projects have been proposed and built, and there are more in the pipeline, as you all probably have some idea of. Next slide now.
Yes.
So this is just a way to visualize sort of that housing history. This is a map of the year a residential structure was built. I believe this is also from the assessor's database, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. And it was in the housing chapter as well. So yes.
Yes. And I've repurposed it again because housing, especially in a primarily residential town like Bridgewater, is a big part of the land use story. So the darker the shade of red here, the earlier the residential structure was built. And as you can see, the dark colors are concentrated really near the town center and along a few transportation corridors, but most of the spread of housing out into most of the area of Bridgewater has occurred post 1970. And this map is also a good opportunity to point out a couple other facets of that sort of constrain and shape development in Bridgewater. So basically the residential pattern has spread out almost all over the whole map of Bridgewater pretty evenly. There's a few areas though that have been left out. And that is, it's the left here, the sort of northwest corner. You'll know that's where a lot of the town's wetlands are. Hockomock Swamp, Lake Nipponicket. I hope I said those things right. People in Massachusetts always get mad when their specific regional places are mispronounced. I apologize if I did that. And then to the south, southeast, there's this also blank white area, and that is, of course, where the correctional facility is, and even surrounding that, there's a lot of state-owned land. So that's just an example of how Bridgewater's natural environment, as well as the position of larger state institutions, especially, sort of shape its development pattern. So that's all for this slide. So touching on commercial and industrial development. So like I said, residential development is the majority of what's gone on in town, but there's a long history of commercial and industrial activity. In colonial times, the town center was also the center of, commerce and trade, just as it was where the people lived. The first major disruption of these traditional patterns occurred in the late 18th through the 19th century, when most of New England got caught up in the Industrial Revolution. Bridgewater was no different. Famously, ironworks opened along the town river. There were some other industries as well. And that was sort of the first big push of industry. That was also sort of near the town center, though, so it did not disperse development patterns too much. The next big development for commercial and industrial development really came with the development of the state highway system. As you know, the Bridgewater has a lot of state highways crisscrossing it every which way. And these were opened in the 20th century. So that is when some of the commercial development started moving to the highway side in the sort of strip form that we're all familiar with. Industrial parks were also situated off of these transportation corridors. And these started to be built in the 70s, right when the population was growing and residential development was going on. A lot of the town's industrial parks were built then. And yeah, there were several large scale developments. In more recent years, there have not been as many sort of new large parks. In that sense, there has been industrial development in town, of course, but it has not been at the same rate as it was back in that era. And another note to make about the commercial and industrial development, if you remember back to that table, I don't expect you to have done all the math yourselves, but about 6%, oh, thanks, Alexis. About 6% total, if you combine industrial and commercial parcels together. It's only about 6% of the land area. So those uses are concentrated in certain areas of the town and are not like super widespread. And we'll see when we talk about zoning, there's sort of a mismatch there, in that a lot more of the town's land is zoned for commercial and industrial uses than is actually being utilized for those purposes. Next slide, please. So one major category for understanding Bridgewater's land use that might not be as important in other towns is the category of institutional land. That is, excuse me, and so in the assessor's database, a few different things get lumped in under that. That's where most town-owned land gets lumped under. It's where all the state-owned land gets lumped under, and a few parcels of nonprofit land. But about half of the institutional land that we saw on that land use map is owned by various state departments. And so we've already talked about the correctional facility to the south of town. That's the sort of orange bit there. Yes, the other big one, of course, is Bridgewater State University, Massachusetts' largest state university that is right near the downtown. That is, it's smaller in land area, but it has a huge presence in that area. Unlike some of these other state institutions and departments, the university, expands, builds, interacts with the town center. And so whereas, the Department of Corrections properties sort of feels like a wall, sometimes, the university really has more of a potential to integrate with the town center. And the other department that I did not necessarily know about before I started doing my research is the Fish and Game department. They own quite a bit of land. That's that light green. And these are like wildlife conservation areas that are open to, hunting and recreation and things like that. So a lot of it is up in the wetland area, but there's also a chunk of it down to the southeast part of town. So and of course, the other major institution is the MBTA, the commuter rail line, the Middleborough line, goes right through the center of Bridgewater. It doesn't take up a lot of land, but it's a really key transportation artery connecting the town to Boston that most towns do not have. And the section of town-owned land to the southwest is another major cluster of institutional land, but that is under the town's control, unlike most of these state land. Next slide.
Sorry, there we go.
That's okay. We also are going to touch on the vacant land. If you remember, that was about 18% of the total land area. And the assessor's database classifies it as either developable or undevelopable. And it's a pretty even split. You can see I didn't highlight them super clearly, but it's about 51% undevelopable and 48.8% developable. That would be about 9% of the total town land that is vacant and still developable. That's a minority of land, but that's still, 1,200 plus acres. That's still a lot of space. So there is still a lot of room in town to be built out. It's not just going to be all infill, I'm sure. So there are plenty of opportunities for that. And a lot of it is in the residential area, just because that is the majority of town land. That's all for that slide, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the start of the zoning section. This is an opportunity we can have if anyone has any comments or questions or anything on the historical land use section. Before we move on to this, now is the time.
And
how do we unmute people?
Yeah, so
Alexis, you can handle that.
I
stuff.
can, and like I said, I don't see a hand raising thing. So if you want to wave your hand, like I see Carlton did, we will. Let me just ask to unmute. Does that work, Carlton? Oh, okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
Good. Right. Yes.
Yeah. you're missing, in one of the areas, you're missing a whole lot of conservation land on the Taunton River on the east side of town. You need to talk with Joan Pierce of the Fish and Game Commission. She tracks all of that kind of conservation land. So there's a significant amount that has been conserved either through state agencies or others, or even developments in town. You're missing, in terms of the housing, and you're missing a number of large developments like the Curve Street 40B, and you're also missing the big apartment complex that's coming in on Plymouth Street down by the railroad. And there is a big industrial area that's not noted there, that's on the town boundaries over at Halifax town boundary and 106. That's mostly industrial, and I don't know if it was ever designated as industrial, but those are true industries, not commercial. So it's right by that water. You see that little bit of water right at the Halifax boundary, up a little bit, over right there. There's a lot of industry right there.
Let me take a look.
Yeah, we can see on this map, there is some industrial zoning in that area.
It's very small, but I think that is not, it may be fully developed now, but it's something that we need to recognize because that's on the east side of town. Let's see. And how much of the unusable, undevelopable land is wetlands?
So that's a good question. We have a soils map in the chapter. I don't have it in, I cannot answer that right now, but when the assessor's office refers to something as developable versus undevelopable, it's not just based on things like soils, and it's also based on, you know, is it conforming to zoning and things like that. So there's, in the chapter, if we don't have this already, we can check to make sure that it is clearly explained how the assessor is defining that. Tyler, is the soils map in this chapter or not? I'm not sure off the top of my head.
The soils map, I don't believe, I think it is in the chapter. I don't believe I put it in the slideshow because I don't have a ton to say about it.
Yeah.
But we do have a soil suitability map that
I
certainly see.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I previously had submitted a soils map and an area of developable land that we developed in 2014. And I don't know if you've seen those, but I would ask you to reference those, please.
Yes. So I'm glad you brought that up. We do have it. And one of the things I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a moment so I can see about pulling that up. And if not, it looked to me like, Carlton, that the data that was from was older. I understand that it was from 2014.
Right.
But it's the reason that we did an updated soils map was because of that. And I'm just trying to find.
But that was the most recent USGS data.
Okay.
It was based on USGS data.
Okay.
So again, I love updated maps, and updated data, but I just, that's a good place to go see. And it was done specifically to find where we had areas that could be, in fact, have structures put on them.
So can you tell me, because that's the other thing I was looking for, was that part of a plan, or because
it was part of the 2014 master plan update, and we were working at that point in time, we were working on a lot of other mapping. The former Greg Dumont, who's the town planner over in Marshfield in your area, had worked hard on those maps.
Yeah, it looks like one of the ones that, hang on, I'm sorry. It's like,
we had a bunch of interns from the university working on it.
Yeah, so I might not be able to pull it up at this very moment, but Carlton, I know what you're talking about. We have seen it, and we did an updated soils map because we wanted to make sure it was the most updated, but I'll take a look and see how they compare, and if we want to include that. Okay.
My suggestion is you when you use that updated, find out an area, split out the wetlands that are probably not developable. So the town has a really good feeling where we can
Yes.
and cannot.
Right, because I understand the assessor is what the assessor is classifying as developable versus undevelopable is not necessarily going to, it's not like just because something is referred to as developable that the soil is necessarily going to make it.
Right. It has a lot to do with the sewage systems and on-site sewage treatment, that kind of thing.
Okay, so Carlton, I have it now, and I wanted to bring it up to make sure this is what you were talking about, because I believe it is. This is the map you're referring to, right? This is the one that I think you sent.
And unfortunately, yeah,
Okay.
that's the map, and it's based on the other map that I sent that actually had the USGS soils map.
Okay, so let me talk to Jennifer and make sure, because that's what I was trying to figure out was how is it being defined as suitable versus moderate? I wanted more of the back data, you know, so that's, I'll connect about that. And
If you can't find the answer, I can dig into my notes because I was intricately associated with it.
Okay, cool, thank you. Anything else, Carlton?
Well, I've given 3 or 4. I can't wait to read the document.
Okay, so if any, I'm just trying to see, and I know some of you are on the phone, so you won't be able to wave at me, but if anybody else wants to, if they have a comment and they just want to kind of wave at the camera, I'm gonna stop screen sharing for just a minute. Chat, ooh, chat is another excellent way. If you are unable to, hands get red, okay. All right, wonderful. Okay. Tyler and Jennifer, I don't know if you see, okay. So Tyler, I'm gonna go back to the presentation. Does that work for you?
Okay, absolutely.
Delightful, all right. All right, can everyone see that? Great, thanks.
Okay, so this is the zoning section of the presentation. We're going to be going through, this is a table of all of the zoning districts, not including the overlays because those are, you know, on top. But this is the entire area of the town and the base zoning districts and what percentage of the area they take up. And we're going to be going through all of these, just briefly touching on, you know, what are the purpose of these, what's allowed there, where are they, things like that.
Tyler, did I cut off your, I'm sorry, Tyler, did I cut off your table? Do you want me to, because it looks. Did I?
Maybe like a little bit off the bottom. I don't think you cut off any content.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure.
It'll be okay, I think. So just like with the land use, residential is the majority use. A full 85% of the area of the town is zoned residential. Then industrial and commercial are a bit smaller, with industrial being slightly bigger, 8.5 and 6.6% respectively. And again, residential A and B, which is that low density single family residential we saw in yellow on the use map, is 65% of the total town area and the vast majority of the residential land here. So there's sort of like 2 different ways to think about these zoning districts. They sort of fall into 2 different categories. These residentials A through D here, the uses and activities that can, you know, go on, the types of developments are not super different. They're all for, you know, residences, you know, mostly single family still. The main difference is sort of the density and intensity, you know, and so if we go back to the zoning map, 1 slide back. Sorry, Alexis.
That's all right, no problem.
You can see residence A is, you know, that light yellow, most of the town. Residential D is the sort of orange that surrounds the town center. And then sort of in between those is C. So it sort of acts like radiating, like out from the center, you know, controlling the sort of density and character of the residences rather than, you know, super specific uses. The other sort of type of zoning district that Bridgewater has is something more like the mobile home elderly community district, to use a residential example, which is that dark yellow up in the corner, which is much more specific and seems, you know, to be pushing a very specific type of development in a smaller section of town. There's a few of those. It's a mix. So that's, yeah, let's get into some specific zoning districts. We're going to do residential first because that's the majority of land.
Okay.
So yep, key points. It's the biggest. Detached, single. It's a little typo. Family dwellings. I've said most of this. Yes, I've covered all this. So these are the key points to remember about these. Even the denser zoning districts are majority single family. So we're going to go in order, starting with residence A and B.
Okay.
Next slide. So for these, I sort of took like a screenshot above to sort of show like a typical density development pattern, and then just a sort of random Google Street View of a representative neighborhood, not chosen for any reason in particular. So residential A and B, I've probably said like 3 times now, it is the least dense. The minimum lot size is about, it's not about an acre, it is 1 acre. The permitted uses are very strict. This is really just designed for, single family homes of the type that you would see in a traditional subdivision. Accessory to that, this is the area where large scale solar facilities are allowed, which makes sense because it's most of the land. So yeah, that's just sort of the base, New England town zoning district residential that you'll see in most places. So the next densest residential zone is C. That's sort of in between the dense core and the not dense residential AB. Here you will see 2 family units, detached or duplex, are allowed by special permit. The minimum lot size is less than half. So this is basically just bridging the divide between the more urban and the more rural character residential areas. And it's sandwiched between the two accordingly. Then residential D is the densest, yet it has the same minimum lot size, but it's the most permissive in terms of dimensional regulations like setbacks and percentage of the lot that can be covered. And this, like C, 2 family units are allowed by special permit. But the biggest difference between residential D is its set of allowed uses. It's right up against the town center. So certain more commercially oriented uses, such as the incubator innovation centers, the ability to convert a residential unit to essentially a mixed use live work with residential units and commercial space is allowed, and some other commercial uses like you can open a veterinary clinic there. So the density and the allowed uses are the biggest difference. And it sort of is allowing sort of a natural progression from the town center outwards through zoning, basically. Next slide. This is the only other special residential underlying use district. This is not an overlay, this is on the base map, the mobile home elderly community. This was enacted in 1994. There are 2 age-restricted communities, 55 or older, Stone Meadow and High Pond. This bylaw does definitely appear to be written with a very particular project in mind. The minimum lot size is 50 acres, just enough to fit these 2 projects in here. And this area is, built out. This is as many developments as can legally be on here. They're not going to build more on this area. So this is an example of, I wasn't around in 1994, but I can only imagine that it was a successful example of the town was working with a developer. They wanted a specific type of development here. They made a new zoning district, and here it is today. And I think it's, these days many towns are, scrambling about, age-restricted housing as the population ages. And Bridgewater's got a bit of a leg up here with this already. So that's nice. Next slide. So this is a special overlay with a residential orientation, the Smart Growth Overlay District, aka Chapter 40R under state law. This was 2008. So basically, the idea of the Smart Growth Overlay District, to quote the state, is to create dense residential or mixed use smart growth areas, including a high percentage of affordable units. So, it addresses the need for affordable units. It creates a high density area. It's supposed to be near a central location or transit. And this overlay district makes it happen. Yes, right there, directly north of Bridgewater State, and therefore nearby the MBTA. Unfortunately, this happened in 2008. Nothing was ever developed under the Smart Growth Overlay District from what I can see. The idea was to take the existing Waterford Village apartments and sort of fill them out, build more, make it denser, maybe put some commercial stuff near the corridor. Would have provided hundreds of units. Unfortunately, that did not pan out. But I think it's a valuable framework to have in the a bylaw, this Smart Growth Overlay skeleton. Even if not knowing the specific politics of the town, even if it can probably never happen here, I don't know if that's true, but maybe we should keep an eye out for other locations that would be suitable, because it's a pretty robust section of the bylaw and the benefits are there, but nothing as far as I can tell was built under this current form. Next slide. Okay, just some miscellaneous implications for residential development found throughout the zoning bylaw. One important one is the open space conservation development. This is something a lot of Massachusetts towns have these days. Basically take a standard subdivision and sort of make the developed part, squeeze it, make it denser, and preserve more of the overall lot as open space. Bridgewater's seems to hew pretty close to what the state recommended model would be. There's nothing crazy about it. At least 60% of the land must be preserved. You can have the same number of units as you would under a conventional. And these, I think a lot of towns, and definitely the guidelines published by the state, would push it in this direction. This is sort of like the ideal default subdivision in the future because of its conservation and implications. A lot of open space conserved, less impervious surface. I don't know if that is the case in Bridgewater, whether this is, I've definitely seen it become sort of like the standard, even for developers, because, they save money on, paving and infrastructure and get the same number of units, sometimes more when there are density bonuses. I don't know if that's been the case in Bridgewater. I haven't gotten my hands on that data yet, but that's a good thing to have in the bylaw. A few typical things you'll see in residential areas in a bylaw are home occupations, like having a little home office, working out of your home, not like we're all doing these days, but, just like running your business out of your home. And accessory dwelling units, like an in-law apartment, they're called. Apologies if you already know this stuff. These are somewhat common concepts, I don't know. And these are both allowed by right in almost every residential zone, with restrictions. Obviously, you can't just, I believe the accessory dwelling unit is limited to 600 square feet. It has to be like open into the other house. So I think that's meant to discourage you from renting it to people you don't know. And the home occupation, it has to be a reasonable, thing to run out of your home. There's a certain percentage of the house it can take up. And mixed use development, right now that is not allowed. Well, it's allowed live work conversion to convert an existing dwelling into a sort of mixed commercial residential dwelling. That's allowed in residential D and a few other zones. But right now for new mixed use developments, that's in the central business district, which we'll get to under the next section of zoning. So, okay, so the next section is on commercial zoning. At this point, does anyone have any questions or comments? I mean, I figured we could stop after each section. If people aren't commenting, we can wait till the end of the whole zoning section, but you can just get a feel for that.
Hi. Um,
Yes.
we explored about in the last 5 years, we extensively explored the possibility of distributed 40 Rs. And we had a significant set of reports and areas defined for that. And I think that's something we need to relook at beyond the Waterford 40R, which has a long history of failed development there because the developer didn't adhere to what we wanted. And also the open space, the land that what I call natural zoning for housing and stuff, that was pushed by the master plan committee and the planning board back in the 3 or 4 years ago. And we really wanted that to become the norm for Bridgewater, not this clear cutting. We put that in because we had too much property clear cut. And that's what we at that point wanted to have be the priority. Just to give you a little background on that one.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Yep.
All right, I'm just checking. I'm going to check in the. Okay, so anybody else? I don't see anybody else. So Tyler, I will go back to screen share.
Okay. All right, so commercial zoning. It's a bit more complex than the residential zoning. There are a lot more sort of specialized, localized zones for specific corridors. It's the physically smallest zoning class. It tends to stick to very tight little corridors around some of the major commercial routes. And there are some, in some zones, differing open space requirements. There's a solid, 20 to 30% in the default sort of business district and the southern business district, which, and then in the gateway districts, there's some much more detailed requirements that we'll go into on those slides. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Right. Okay. The gateway districts are first. So these are very small. They are both located along Route 104, one to the west and one to the east. And so I sort of lumped them together because they're very similar in terms of purpose and regulations. Yeah, so that little strip there, and then to the east, yeah, that is not even all the gateway business district. Some of that is regular business.
Yes.
No, I think it's right.
No.
It's a lot closer to the university. It's like a little strip right along there.
If I could zoom in,
it's
I
really,
would.
They're really small, and they're also right next to a regular business district, so it can be hard to see. But yes, so essentially the idea behind these seems to have been, they're called gateway districts because they're right on 104, the major east-west route into Bridgewater. And they're some of the first areas that a visitor to Bridgewater will see. I don't have the traffic stats, but that's the rationale given in the zoning bylaw at least. And so they want to, the idea is to develop it commercially while keeping the sort of, rural New England small town character that we all love so much. And this is sort of like a good example. This is in the, not the east, but the regular gateway business district. That seems to be what it's going for. So in order to accomplish that, there's a really detailed set of design guidelines, and anyone building in that area who needs a special permit is going to trigger a design review, where the design review committee delivers a report, basically. I mean, it's non-binding, but the planning board must consider it in granting special permits in this area. And so the guidelines basically want to look like this, wood, handmade signs, traditional materials, and, housing layouts. So that's the idea behind that, basically. The East Gateway Business District, that's okay. It has many more allowed uses. Not sure why exactly. My guess is that it's closer to the center, whereas the Gateway Business District is sort of way out where things are less dense. So I will say this is from the Gateway Business District. The East Gateway Business District is not, does not look quite like this. It looks a lot more residential, and residential uses are permitted in this area, but the East Gateway Business District looks more residential in character. It's kind of hard to tell in some places that it is a business district. But so these, I have a section about what changes have been implemented since the last master plan, but these are one of them. And they seem like a response to comments in that about sort of design review, making sure development sort of, looks how we want it to look. And there's a lot of landscaping goals and a required sidewalk easement, which for the Gateway Business District, I don't know how feasible that is because it's very far away from the walkable center, but it's there's a effort put in, at least on the bylaw side, to make a sort of walkable, green, quaint, nice area. So the next is the South Business District. This is the largest business district. This is along Bedford Street, aka Route 28/18, in the south of town. Yeah, so as you can see, unlike some of the other districts, it's a commercial corridor, but it goes really far out from the road on both sides. And that is intentional. The goal of this is to, quoting the bylaw, encourage the development of major business parks involving a variety of commercial, light manufacturing, and transportation uses. And so part of the reason it goes so far back is to allow for, large complexes with their own, parking and interconnected green areas and things like that. And also there are provisions for, sharing utilities and, like I said, open space and things to encourage these sort of large developments. For the most part, that hasn't really come to pass. This is a very large district, but there's only a couple of little industrial areas to the north. That's a fireworks circle. And then down there, I forget if that has a name. It's where the ice arena is. And so there has been some activity, but a lot of it remains undeveloped. On the east side, that's almost certainly because the state owns a ton of that land. In some places, almost all the way up to the road. Generally, I should have said that generally the business districts are some of the least intensive setback wise. You can, build closer to the lot line, cover up greater percentage of the lot. The South Business District is a little bit stricter in that. It has, very large setbacks and requirements, which I guess they figured would be fine because the lots are so big, but that's one thing to note about that. Next is the Central Business District. So this is the traditional town center, sort of the traditional heart of Bridgewater. The dimensional regulations here are interesting. Basically, everything is grandfathered in, essentially. So for existing lots, there's no minimum lot size, no minimum lot frontage. If it's there, it can continue to be there. And there are requirements for newly created lots, but they allow for much smaller and denser lots than anywhere else in town. So it seems to be designed very much with that sort of, dense, walkable feel that it has, and to continue that onward. As I mentioned earlier, this is the area where mixed use developments are allowed through a special permit as of 2016. That is a pretty major change for the district, coming relatively recently. It's a use sort of unique to the town. I don't know if anything has been built under that specific bylaw provision, but that's one of the key characteristics of it now. There are, density regulations. Let's see, I believe the densest it can be is 27 bedrooms per acre at most, but that's a lot more than is typically permitted elsewhere in town. So next slide. Okay, now we're going to get into overlay districts. Those are the underlying commercial districts. I didn't really talk about the you can see here the BB, that's just the underlying business district. because it is sort of is just that. All the other districts are sort of modifications on that. That's just, your typical business district, nothing too much to say about it. But this Bedford Street overlay is interesting. It is along, there's a strip of business district in the northern part of Bedford Street. And this overlay is sort of off to the side on that. And so it's actually, the underlying zoning there is residential C, not business. But the purpose of this is to basically cluster the commercial development into a smaller, more intense area while conserving more open land permanently within the Aquifer Protection District. And they use the mechanism of transfer of development rights, which is basically where the construction takes place within one area, but like the associated open space is located elsewhere. So the idea is to preserve land elsewhere in this Aquifer district while doing the construction in one area. Next slide. Okay, industrial zones. Anyone have any comments about the commercial zones? Yes. Yeah. Wait, I can't.
Yep, let me. Okay, Carlton, you should be unmuted.
I'm unmuted now, and
Yes.
I since I lived this for 15 years and all this development stuff, I feel that I need to chime in on a number of things.
Mhm.
First of all, the Gateway District, the reason it was put in that way, so it was to protect the entrance, as you said, the entrance of the town, so that it didn't become a Route 44 with used car lots, that kind of stuff, whatever. So we did that. It was originally intended to be an overlay district, but apparently the way the language reads right now, it is a full district. Unfortunately, it splits lots, and that's not a good thing. But we put it to 200 feet back, but you speak correctly about what it's intended to do. I wanted to clarify that. And the east came after the west, or the original Gateway District, because the same thing, we wanted to protect that area. And it does run basically from the entrance to the rail station in BSU towards the downtown. But the reason, again, for those two were the not to become a Route 44 type entrance, to preserve the history of the town. Does it really, is in the commercial zone, the Bedford overlay, does it really allow transfer to development rights?
I believe it does, yes.
There's only one transfer development right that never got put into the deeds, but it's more down a little bit further south, and that had to be special action at a town meeting. So it is supposedly on the books, but it's never been, so to speak, consummated because it was never put in the deeds.
Well, I will definitely double check that. I believe that phrase does appear in the bylaw, but I'll double check if you think
I didn't think any TDRs ever showed up in any of our districts, and I think it's a great tool, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, but I will double check. I will make sure that's correct.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just clicking through to see if I see any other hand waves. All right. Okay. So Tyler, are you ready for me to move forward?
Yep, let's do it.
All right.
So next up is industrial. There are fewer of these. One thing to note about the industrial zones, they all have very similar dimensional regulations. I think really the only thing that differs between them is some of them have like a 5% difference on lot cover of what you can develop. So the real difference between these is the uses. And that second bullet point is just a note that there are allowable by special permit secondary uses, like just fully contained within industrial facilities to serve the people who work there, like, say like a restaurant or something like that. That's just an interesting use note. Yes, next slide. Okay, so industrial A, like residential A, B, and business B, this is sort of, the default. These are a few just Google Maps screenshots of a few examples of these districts. Yes, so industrial A, yes, it's found in a few places. Yes, thank you, Alexis.
Mhm.
Yeah, essentially this is the default district. It has industrial parks. I believe this one on the right is Scotland, Scotland Road, I think it's called. Sorry if I got that wrong. And that second one is sort of to the west of town, Bridgewater, Rainham Sand and Stone, Inc., a sort of large sand and stone.
Mhm.
I see in the chat, Jennifer has put that the Bedford Street overlay does allow for transfer of development rights. Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate that. So moving on to industrial B should be the next one.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this is a very small district, kind of easy to miss. This is an excerpt from the town's official zoning map. It's sort of right to the northwest of the central business district, a couple little chunks. My understanding is that follows more closely like the historical industrial patterns of the town. That's sort of more where those like old mills and ironworks were. The difference between industrial A, the sort of default, and these is that industrial B, it has fewer allowed uses, really. And I think that's likely due to it being so close to the most densely populated area of town. Things like lumber suppliers, certain types of retail, and things like that are allowed. It's also a place where some homework conversions are allowed. So I've talked with IB, I've sort of talked about all the zoning districts surrounding the central business district. And what's interesting is they have a lot of things in common, like those homework conversions are allowed in residential D, industrial B, and in the central business district, three from each of the major use categories. But yet there are some common and very specific uses common to these and nowhere else. And they sort of form this like central district that goes beyond the central business district. So I thought it was interesting that already sort of Bridgewater has sort of moved towards, cross zoning harmonizing of certain uses based on natural patterns of potential use. So yeah, IB very small, differs slightly in use from IA due to its location. Next slide. Yeah, so the Elm Street Industrial District, it's a pretty large district to the west of town. So it's also the newest industrial district. So again, going back to the bylaw, the Bridgewater bylaw is very helpful in that for most of these districts beyond the defaults, they do have, actual statements of purpose and intent. And I think that's something a lot of towns are missing, and it's helpful in doing an analysis like this. So that's definitely a strength of the bylaw. So according to the bylaw, this area is meant to foster office and industrial development, and it also puts a point on the importance of low impact design principles because it is sort of in that area of town with a lot of wetlands on either side. Unlike some other industrial districts, it is very explicit in, saying we do not want residential uses here. Residential uses are incompatible with the purposes of the district is almost a direct quote from the bylaw. Whereas in some of the others, you can like special permit your way to doing residential based on residential AB guidelines. Here, that is not the case. So there's a certain special permit procedure that can be followed here for a commercial/industrial park. It has to be on a lot at least 5 acres. But the upside is the setback requirements are less strict than the underlying IE district. And there's a sort of set of uses based on floor area, office and laboratory, industrial, wholesale, transportation. And this is meant to allow greater flexibility for larger scale planned development projects. I think a lot of that language is copied from the planned development district, but it's allowable by special permit here. There is a little overlay, the Elm Retail Overlay District, way to the north of town. And as far as I can tell, the main purpose of this is just to designate where medical marijuana facilities can operate. And there are indeed several in that area. I think that's all for IE for now. Next. Yes, the Planned Development District. Now, it's under the industrial section because it seems like the main purpose, as stated under that section of the bylaw, is to have industrial parks. That has been on the books since 1989, and it's in this little corner of town right next to 495 in this sort of like little triangle on the western border of town. It did not seem like since 1989 much happened there at all. So, which explains why the town put this Chapter 43D overlay on almost the entirety of it. So I'm going to talk about them together because they're almost completely contiguous. So 43D is basically expedited permitting. So basically it's streamlines administrative procedures and sets a maximum 180-day turnaround for permits. But it doesn't affect the underlying like use requirements or anything like that. It's just faster, easier permit process. So obviously that's meant to encourage development in the area. And I don't know if it's directly because of that overlay, but in recent years, there has been a lot more development in this area after not having as much for a while. This is access at Lakeshore, huge, residential apartment development in that area. I believe that the Viva Bridgewater is going on in right near there as well, right? So now this area has seen a lot of development potential recently, although interestingly, mostly, dense residential, which was not the original purpose of the district, but it has sort of become where those projects, one of the places in town where those projects are going in. Next slide. Okay, so we're almost to the end of this zoning section. Here are just some miscellaneous issues from the zoning bylaw. In the actual chapter, there's a lot of sort of administrative stuff, site plan review, special permit. There's not too much to say about those other than, just outlining how they work, which is pretty typical for Massachusetts towns. So I mostly left them out, but I will just note here that the special permit granting authority, that power, as is pretty common, is, split between the planning and zoning boards, depending. There's a long history of that in Massachusetts that I won't go into, but Bridgewater is a place where it's pretty roughly split. It doesn't seem like there's any like clear rule of when that is. You just have to read the section of the bylaw to see who you have to go before. Then there's the floodplain and aquifer protection districts. The Bedford Street overlay, when I was talking about that, I mentioned the aquifer district. Both of these are similar in that they're environmental protection overlays. And basically, the important thing for development is that they will require special permits. Floodplain, always for new development or expansions. Aquifer, there's formulas and different thresholds depending on how large it is, but I'd say that's also likely to trigger a special permit. And so basically that is meant to give the boards a chance to, review to make sure that, the aquifer and is being protected and that new buildings in the floodplain district are, adequately protected from flooding. And there's certain, quote unquote, noxious uses that are also prevented in the aquifer protection zone, things like gasoline or animal manure that could leach into the water supply. That's those. What slide do I have next here? Okay, yeah, okay. Parking, that sort of goes along with miscellaneous zoning things. This is, parking is a huge part sometimes of what can and can't get built. If a parking requirement is, hugely onerous, developers will balk at it. In Bridgewater, I think in most zones, there are potential ways to get parking reductions, especially during a site plan review where the planning board has a lot more discretion to do those kinds of things, up to 25%, which that's something. So you can see here for all dwelling units, doesn't matter if it's multifamily or one or two, that's 2 spaces per unit. And even with the reduction, depending on the type of, specialized housing, like if there was like, say, a senior housing development, that would probably not work for that. But on one hand, I've seen parking sections that are so specific and detailed for every imaginable type of business that it's kind of a relief to see, dwellings, commercial space, one per 200 gross feet, and that's it. On the other hand, you do maybe sometimes lose some, edge cases that makes it. Oh, yes, I think this is the last slide on zoning. Oh, sorry, that was a private message. I just got a chat message. There will be opportunity for comment after this slide, I believe.
Mhm.
And these bullet points down here for the central business district and all these business districts, that's just to note that there are some, specialized, shared parking or location, varying by district, by the character of the district. So I just wanted to touch on parking a bit because that is an important part of zoning. I believe that's the last slide on zoning. Yes.
Yes.
So yes, for industrial or miscellaneous zoning comments, the floor is now open. I know we have at least one person who wants to mention something.
Yes, Stephen, I saw your hand. You're good. I think you're unmuted.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment about the industrial B section. I know it's one of the smaller and kind of like less known areas. I actually live in the industrial B section.
Oh, okay.
And the thing that's interesting is that the majority of it, if you look to the south of the train tracks, other than like Fairview Millwork and the old shoe factory, a lot of it is actually residential. So it's something that, like, I don't know if it's been overlooked. It just, like, the reason why my part is zoned industrial, because back in the 1800s it was a cotton gin factory, and it just never changed from that. But it hasn't been a cotton gin factory for over 100 years. So it's just kind of it's an interesting area where, like, I think it's going to be looked at closely, because not only north of the train tracks where Perkins Ironworks is, that land's being sold, and I think there's been discussion of that being potential office, potential live work, kind of like residential. I think for the town, it's something that people need to look at as what is industrial B.
Yeah, that raises a good point. I sort of mentioned this, 10 hours ago, however long this has been going on, but a lot of the industrial and commercial zones, not just IB, are not very, highly built out for that purpose. Either there's a lot of, vacant or undeveloped land, or there's a lot of residential. Like in a lot of these, especially like in some of the gateway districts and some of the other business districts, there are a lot of residential uses, and in the IB too. So that's just a point that your comments made me think of, and I wanted to put a point on it, that there's a lot of residential going on in most zones.
Okay, I'm going to re-screen share. I was just exiting so I could go back and look at the land use map. So, just to compare how it, okay, so just give me just a moment.
Okay, any other
comment?
Carlton had a comment.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I have 3 of them. The first one is with 1IB, 1B. The ones that are north of the town that Steve just spoke of, those are also historically designated as the industrial quarter in Bridgewater. So anything in there that happens has historical value, and it's actually designated up in Macris. The other point is the priority development district out at on the other side of 24th and south of 104. There have been, I think it's now been permitted, or it's close to being permitted, a final build out or close to final build out of that whole property. To the east of Viva is a proposed, and I know it's gone through the planning board, a kind of multi-business type building to go up. It's very large. So that needs to be recognized. And I think the other thing is, since the Elm Street has been repaved and everything's going on there, I think the document needs to clearly update of all the Elm Street build out that has occurred in the last 18 months.
I agree.
I used to drive up there and see nothing, and now I drive up there and almost every lot that I'm aware of has a building on it. So I think that's important, because what can we do anything else in the future if that's all built out?
Mhm.
Those are my 3 points there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Good points. Anybody else?
Oh, Frank.
Oh, Frank, yes.
Go ahead, Frank.
We hear so much about the gateways. What does the term gateway really mean?
My impression of how it's used in the bylaw is that it is like the first thing you see when you drive into Bridgewater, like a gateway welcoming you to the city. I don't think it has any meaning beyond that in this context. It's used in different ways in like a Massachusetts state context, but I think that's all it means here.
Does it usually mean a very high traffic roadway from one town into another?
I'm not sure if that's a commonly used term. Have you heard that, Alexis? I mean,
I mean, there's gateway communities as designated, but
right. Yeah, that's a totally different concept.
Right, exactly. So in terms of a gateway, my understanding, Tyler, has always been exactly what you're saying. It's the major entrances into Bridgewater. Frank, you look like you have a thought, though.
Yeah, like I've already expressed my thoughts on
Yep.
Route 28 as it's leaving Bridgewater and going into West Bridgewater.
Yes.
There's large areas of land up here that's not being used. And do we want to see another 50, 60 houses being built on that thing? Or should we have some type of, as I expressed in that thing that you passed out earlier in time, I don't hear a heck of a lot about housing for the elderly, okay? And affordable housing, mixed use, where you will have affordable housing on the second and third floor. We're not talking about a lot of that in this whole project. And every time I bring it up, it kind of gets swept under the rug. And that we're really missing a big point here. And Route 28, when you come up on this end of, like I said, there's a huge piece of property right there. The sewer line runs right straight through the middle of it. And I'm just more concerned about what's going to happen is more and more of our senior citizens are not going to be able to afford to live in town anymore. And they're just going to sell their homes and go. They can't afford the taxes. They can't afford the upkeep of a big home. And there's no small places for them to go to. And like businesses, I mean, there's a lot of businesses in town that people have to go out of town for. Okay, there's no question about it. Okay, and a mixed use up in this area here would probably work out great, but it's completely being swept under the carpet. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a very good point. There is not a lot of explicit regulations for affordable housing in this bylaw. That is certainly true. I think the smart growth overlay would have been a way to do that. That is explicitly part of it. But yeah, that is not as big a part of the bylaw as it could be. And yeah, mixed use is a good vehicle for that. But yeah, like I said, it's only in that small little central business district right now, and large scale mixed use really can't happen anywhere else easily under normal circumstances. There's the what's it called? The live work thing. That's just like a single house. So those are very good points. That is something that I think the bylaw could do more on. Anybody else want to make a comment?
I see Carlton's hand. My mouse is being wonky. I don't know if someone else can unmute. Oh, there we go. Okay, Carlton. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, just to Frank's point, it was defined as a gateway district because those were, in fact, the gateway, just like the Arch in St. Louis is the gateway into the town. And so I worked and helped write that. And the purpose was specifically to manage the type of development and the look of the buildings, as was said earlier, in that stretch, because we did not want it to become Route 44 in Raynham. Same thing for the other one. I do agree wholeheartedly with the housing question. And I think, not sure where that goes in this discussion, but that we need it. The third point I have is, I have to pull it back out of my brain. I'm not pulling it up right now. I'm sorry.
Right. You can, I'll pause for questions again. You can bring it up then.
Well, it has to do with, yeah, I'll figure it out. Sorry,
No problem. We will.
my age is showing up.
All right, Tyler, I don't believe I see any other hands or anyone in the chat. So are you ready to move on?
Yes. All right. We are in the home stretch here, people.
Oh, sorry.
Last few slides. So part of the chapter is a sort of analysis of what changes have happened since the previous master plan. I know there was the update in 2014. My understanding was that was mostly the same as the 2002 master plan, just with some updates and additions. So that's the plan I referenced. So the new districts in that time have been the Elm Street Industrial, both gateway districts, the Bedford Street overlay, the smart growth overlay, and then the expedited permitting and priority development sites, which we've all gone over. But I think that in their own way, a lot of these were sort of responses to some of the recommendations and goals and visions of that plan. So on the next slide, there's a lot of text here. This is, I just plunked this in from the chapter. This is sort of an analysis of some selected major goals and recommendations of that older plan. And I tried to look at what has been done in town since then that looks like it was either in direct response to that or even just coincidentally fit into that goal. And so some things there definitely have been progress on. The first, prioritize high density / senior housing near town center, promote mixed use. Since that was written, there is mixed use allowable by special permit in the central business district. As we discussed earlier, that's fine, Alexis. As we discussed earlier, there is definitely more that can be done on that, and maybe in other areas of town too. I mean, certainly there, but maybe in other places. The next one, the fight against strip development. The gateway districts are definitely address part of that. I mean, it addresses sort of the appearance, the character, and everything. It still is sort of oriented in that strip way, though. I think that in the central business district and in like a mixed use development, how I interpreted this was sort of like walkable, sort of self-contained, community. And on those highways, that really hasn't come to pass. Channel development, encourage infill into already disturbed areas. I think I mentioned earlier, we are seeing that less new development out in the countryside, more focused on already developed areas. This is a very specific one, established 4 mixed use / commercial residential nodes outside of the center. That hasn't really been done, although the sort of the priority development district is sort of becoming that without, explicit mention of that goal in the bylaw necessarily that I remember. But the other areas that has still been contained to the center. Determine parking based on actual need. I am not sure what those regulations looked like in 2002, but it doesn't seem like they've changed that much. Create design standards for commercial areas. I think the gateway districts are probably a direct response to that. Upgrade existing cluster development standards. The open space development has done that. And consider phased growth ordinance. I didn't see that had happened. And I think growth in Bridgewater has slowed a lot more. I don't know if that's still on the top of people's priority lists. So I just put this together to show in going forward, thinking about this section and what our recommendations are and what we're hoping to see, what came of it last time? What are we still trying to do from there? What have we addressed somewhat, and just trying to make this document as useful as possible to people trying to read it and actually do the things within it. And that was sort of the idea of going back and looking back at changes since the last master plan. Go ahead, Alexis. So we're getting into the recommendations section. Alexis will have some more things to say about this in a little bit, but like I said way back at the beginning, I just, I looked at the goals and strategies that this committee and Barrett Planning Group had sort of laid out together already, and sort of thought about, in the land use section, and thought about, based on my research in writing this section, what are some potential, draft recommendations we could have that fit under this section. So that is on the next slide. One thing up top that is sort of unfortunate timing wise, as you all probably know, the bylaw is currently undergoing a revision, but it's not, in its finalized form. So in terms of providing clear, concise zoning regulations, I have plenty of comments on the set of zoning regulations I've been reading, but that's not going to be the zoning regulations soon. So there's only so much we can say on that at this time, unfortunately. So just some other things, employ smart growth development approaches to preserve open space and encourage sustainable development practices. My ideas were to investigate the use of 40R frameworks in other locations. As Carlton mentioned earlier, it looks like a study has been done on that. I think that'll be very interesting to read and make sure that is incorporated into this section. And then just making sure that the open space subdivision developments are centered as much as possible to really try to make that the default. I mean, so there's some recommendations that say literally make it legally the default. That is not the case in Bridgewater, but the more those can be encouraged over traditional subdivisions, the better. And I think right now, one thing I noticed in the process is that currently you're required to file a definitive concurrently, which I think I've worked in towns where they were really trying to get away with that because it took so much time and effort, and the public was confused and the developers were, it wasn't really working for anyone. And I think that maybe people would be more inclined to do that if that was, reevaluated. Making it as smooth and streamlined as possible is the upshot of that. Review the boundaries of use districts. I think maybe expanding that mixed use beyond just the CBD zone and into the sort of greater central business district. Like I said, already there's been some acknowledgement that like IB and residential C being right up there share some of the characteristics. Like live work conversions are the big example. Those are only allowed in those districts that seemingly have nothing else in common besides their location. So sort of crossing those boundaries and encouraging mixed use in more and expanded places. And the other note I had just for improving efficiency and things is, see where you maybe with a creative and just a creative rewriting of the bylaw, you could eliminate the need for special permits in some places and, streamline, making it easier to know who the special permit granting authority is, things like that. And so those are some draft recommendations. I won't be offended if you throw them out. Hey, the committee is here to help us out with those. And so I'm going to transfer over and, well, before I let Alexis take over, maybe we can have one more chance for comments or questions, and then maybe you can like carry that over into what you want to talk with them about. You're muted, Alexis.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's see, Carlton, your hand was up?
Yeah, I apologize partly because I talk a lot, but I've also, like I said, engaged in this. I recommend you strongly that you look at the 2014 update on housing and open space, because several of the recommendations you have here were in that update. And I don't want to, some of them have been completed. For example, the natural resource housing development thing was accomplished. So that has a number of things that should be incorporated in here, both in the open space and the housing. because it got to zoning. The other thing that I forgot about, there is a proposal that's being reviewed now to change the zoning out where Home Depot is, where Elm Street and West is. And I think it would be a lot easier to do is simply extend the Gateway District on the north side of the roadway out, because right now they're trying to rezone a whole bunch of housing. And that goes against what the concept, what was the Gateway District. So I would suggest.
That's not true, Carlton. We're not rezoning a bunch of housing. It's one house and businesses.
Okay, I apologize. I misunderstood, but I think you could just extend the Gateway District more easily. The third thing is, I don't know if you're aware of, back in 2017 or so, that whole area around Elm Street and the Home Depot area and all that was designated as a regional priority development district.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's all I have, other than to say, very nice presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And I appreciate your feedback. You gave me some good leads to chase down doing the next draft of this. Does anybody else have any other comments?
I
No?
don't
All right. Well, thank you, all of you, not just Carlton, for all of your feedback that you gave. I thank Tim. I want to acknowledge everyone who spoke, gave good feedback. And I appreciate you listening. And Alexis has more to say.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about next steps and continue to give you an opportunity to weigh in on policy recommendations, because we did get some feedback on the Google Doc that I had shared. And it's okay if it's just that you kind of want to read along and see what other people have to say. But I would like to send that again and just ask you in the next week, and I'll put this all in an email so that you you don't have to write down what I'm saying or anything, but read what your fellow committee members have said. Even if you have no thoughts about what you would say. And to Carlton's point about the 2014 update, I might modify the Google Doc to kind of include a column about that, just to kind of give you some input about, one of the exercises we had done, I believe it was in the last summer's public forum, was what was the town saying in 2002, 2014, and where are we now on those? So I want to put those side by side to kind of give you a boost in your thinking on those strategies. And so if I send that out again, if you would all just take the time to read the really great ideas that your fellow committee members have already shared and add your thoughts, that would be wonderful, because our goal is in the third and final public forum for community input to be able to show some ideas that we have for recommendations and get public feedback on them. It's the same way, if you recall, when we were coming up with the strategies as a committee, we did the survey to get public input, and we'd like to do the same now on the recommendation. So I'm going to show you what it looks like so far. First, I'm going to stop the screen share for just a minute so I can pull this up and show you where we are at with this. Stand by. Okay, just kidding on that. I am struggling tonight with the screen share. All right, so share screen. Here we go. Okay, and Frank, I think you tried to access, I'm not sure if this is what you were trying to access this evening. I got a request from a different email of yours to access another Google Doc that we had worked on together. I suspect it was actually this one you were looking for. So, because this is the more recent one, the one that you had requested access for, that was on it, like when we were first starting to talk about a vision statement. So I'll make sure, Frank, that you have this to the email that you requested sharing on. But can everyone see my this Google Doc? Get a nod? Okay, great, awesome. So what I had asked you to do prior to our October meeting we had listed the goals and strategies and asked for some recommendation ideas. And we have some great ones. In fact, some of this input is where Tyler got, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is one of the things that you shared with me tonight, was that you used some of these ideas in your presentation for potential recommendations as well. But so you can see it's broken down by each element. And I am, as I said, planning on restructuring to kind of remind you what 2014 recommendations looked like. I even saw some feedback in here that there are, particularly in the public facilities and services, that we may need to reevaluate the strategies and even the goals for some. So we'll take a look at that on our end. But so what I'm going to ask you to do is, like I said, read over what everyone has, add in any more input by, I'll give you another firm deadline. And then we want to include this in the November 30th presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and share that. And I hope you don't mind. We took the liberty of saying November 30th because in the poll that we shared asking for availability, the people who replied said they were available both days. And so that would be our preference. But if anyone if they realize now that you forgot to do that poll and you have a major conflict, just please let us know as soon as possible. We haven't published any notice about it or anything, but we would like to as soon as possible so that people have enough notice. But as of right now, I'm saying November 30th, third public meeting, will be presenting the vision, goals, and strategies that you have worked so hard on with us, and then soliciting feedback on the recommendations. I'm really hoping that we get a lot of attendance because I want to use the breakout room feature and have kind of smaller group discussions if enough participants show up. It's kind of hard to gauge whether or not that will happen in advance, but I think that would be really great. So this is just kind of a mock flyer that I've made up for now, just, that we'll finalize once we have the date finalized, and put in a Zoom link, print them out, and talk to Jennifer about where we should distribute them, and also online give some, a push for people to attend that. So that is the plan for November 30th. And then I need to go back. That is not what I wanted to do. So I think I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're just probably also with some feedback we got tonight, want to give that chapter another review. Tyler, you mentioned you got some good insight this meeting. So give us this week to kind of incorporate some of the feedback we heard from you and clarify some of the questions you had. We'll get you that land use chapter. And then, so December 14th, we discussed that this was going to be, when I say we, I mean the consultant team and town staff, and just a logical kind of wrap up in terms of our monthly meetings, because we're ready to move into, once we have the recommendations at least drafted, to move into starting to talk about the implementation plan, which, because that's really being done at the staff level, we're going to primarily work on with town staff and consult committee members as needed, because, for example, as we're working on the housing, if we have a question, we might reach out to Bill, or energy, we might reach out to Carlton. So we will certainly still be consulting with committee members on an ongoing basis as we work through that implementation plan. So I talked also with Judy about the very hard work you did on the comments resolution matrices on the chapters that have been distributed already. Plus, we want to give you time to be able to do the same thing for the land use chapters that you'll be getting. So I can't promise that you will see the comments implemented by December, because we're working with outside consultants, as you know as well. We have to consult with McMahon Transportation and the consultant who worked on the cultural resources chapter. But what we do want to make sure you have by then, at least, is your CRMs back because if you recall, there's a consultant's response column. So we are going to give you our responses to all of the wonderful, helpful comments that you made. So you can rest assured that they will be addressed, or at least that we've heard them and discussed internally how to address them. So that is the plan for moving forward. If, like I said, if anyone has a major issue with November 30th, please, please, please let us know. I don't see any. Oh, great. I just see a message. Matt, thank you. That would be great, about sending out the notice when it's ready. So yeah, so let's all talk on our end, Jennifer and the consultant team, to just get that date nailed down. We'll get that sent out, and you can expect an email from me kind of consolidating all of this in a written form for you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. I really
Alexis,
wish.
I just
Oh,
want
go
to say one thing quick. If any of you think of any additional comments, wake up tomorrow, wish you had said something, please do email me. I just put my email in the chat. It's tyler@barrettplanningllc.com. We are, like Alexis said, we're trying to get it done by the end of the week, so the sooner the better, but I would absolutely welcome any additional feedback any of you fine committee members might come up with. So
Yes.
that's all.
Yes. As usual, this was very helpful. And I wish so much that, if we weren't in COVID times, that our December meeting were in person, because, it would be put a nice bow on everything. But anyway, so thank you very much, everybody. And if I don't see Jennifer, anything on your end, are we all good to go? All right,
Yeah, no,
wonderful.
I'm good.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Everyone.